Prince Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender once said, "Growing up, we were taught that the Fire Nation was the greatest civilization in history, and somehow the way of sharing our prosperity to the rest of the world. What an amazing line that was! The people of the world are terrified of the Fire Nation." And that, by the way, is what the world thinks of the United States. Qassam Rashid in Blue Sky posted this. Now, I don't agree that the United States has been at war for 232 years out of 250 years, so he might use a definition that most people do on what counts to war or battles, or he might be using, or he also might be talking about the Native American genocide, of course. So obviously he's using a different definition of war than most people do. However, he seems to be expressing fear that the United States could use nuclear weapons. And look, in normal times, I actually think these people are overreacting, might be panicking, overreacting because the United States has done so much over the years. I mean, bombing in the Middle East. I think a lot of people are really afraid that the United States could use nuclear weapons. I mean, it's not a regime change, and I think that maybe people are actually afraid that the United States could resort to using it. Why? Because the United States used them before in 1945 against Japan. Now, I think what made people around the world say that most Americans support the atomic bombs in Japan, although support for that has declined over time. And even when I was growing up, I remember in textbooks in history where there was debate whether or not the United States should have done it or not, and whether or not we did. The real reason why we did was not to end the war, but to prevent the Soviet Union from getting into Japan. Now, for most presidents, I think their fears of U.S. just using nuclear weapons for no reason would be overreacting, because that's not something I don't think they actually would do that without a strong reason. I am concerned, however, about this one president. Yes, I'm well aware you had JFK almost getting into nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Nixon pretending to be a madman. Of course, you had Reagan, and even Bush, who I thought was dumb as a doorknob. Yeah, he didn't use them either. This president, though, Trump, is far more unstable and far more unhinged than any president we ever had. I mean, at least in his first term, there were adults in the room that kind of kept him from his worst impulses. This time he has none of that. In addition to that, he's also surrounded now by Christian fundamentalists and Christian extremists in his administration. I mean, you have Pastor John Hagee recently who practically gave sermons saying that this war is going to lead to Turkey and Russia and what's left of Iran attacking Israel, and they would be stopped by massive earthquakes and a rain of fire, which practically is implying a nuclear bomb. And of course, you have reports that the U.S. military is now telling soldiers that this is a holy war, that they should be prepared for Armageddon. The thing is, in the past, we did not have this problem in the past. Yes, I understand people's fear the United States were using them again, but the government wasn't full of Christian fundamentalists. Unfortunately, now it is. They're full of evangelicals, and the problem with the evangelical movement is that they want Armageddon. Actually, a huge reason why they're the biggest Zionists in the world. People say, how did they get into power? Look, how did they get into power? Well, you had a Southern strategy, and the South was always full of evangelicals, and they took over the Republican Party. You have to understand, the predecessor of Bernie Sanders in the U.S. Senate in Vermont was actually a Republican. He actually left the Republican Party and became independent because he saw that the Republican Party was taken over by Southern evangelicals. I mean, Barry Goldwater, actually, who was a Republican, by the way, a strong Republican, who was considered an extremist, actually wore about an that he was concerned that they were taking over the Republican Party. And they had taken over the Republican Party.